And one of the things I'd like to just insert, because sometimes the game of work gets a bad rap about being athletics and jocks and that sort of thing. But we figured out that the major application of the game of work is something that's universal, and that's shopping. Because you've never met a shopper who didn't come home and tell you how much they saved.
Welcome to Elevate Utah. I'm Cort Brady. I'm missing my co-host, Carlos Souza. Today, we have Chuck Coonradt on the podcast. He is the founder of the Game of Work. He is also a business consultant. You've consulted over 4,000 companies on this methodology and framework. You're the author of multiple books, including The Game of Work, which I have one more chapter on, and has been an amazing read. I posted a quote from your book every morning on my Instagram, so he might have a few more book sales. Forbes calls you the grandfather of gamification. I'm so stoked to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being on it.
Pleasure is mine.
So we're just going to jump in. You talk about how to gamify your business so people enjoy work as much as they enjoy play. Tell me how do you sum up the Game of Work? What is it?
Well, there's 5 real principles in the Game of Work. We had a tongue twister that went along with the Game of Work, and that is that, and it was really the original epiphany, is why is it that people will pay for the privilege of working harder than they'll work when they're paid? And so we sponsored for a while something we called Ski and Scheme at the Deer Valley Ski Resort, who have been a client of ours since 1987. And we would meet at 7 in the morning. We get 2 hours of work in. At 9 o'clock, we'd go ski. Well, at 7 o'clock in a ski resort, the meeting rooms are not pre-warmed. So people would come in and go, oh, man, it's chilly in here. What? Can we get that thermostat to go up? And it was probably 65 degrees overnight. At 9 o'clock, we'd put our ski gear on, pick up some instructors, and we'd head out into 30-degree weather, and everybody thought it was just the best. So why will people pay for the privilege of working harder than they'll work when they're paid? The Utah deer hunt is less significant than it was now, but at one point in time there were 200,000 or 2 million people in the state of Utah. We would sell 250,000 deer permits. And it was, if your family was there was a camp location, there was a menu, there was a whole deal. And the average deer contributes about $800 to the Utah economy and weighs less than 100 pounds. So deer meat, compared to the worst steak, the most expensive steak you can find in a meat shop, is way more expensive. But the big question was, when the hunt weekend started, if you came back to work, the question was, did you get your deer? And it's like they all had names on them. This is Chuck's, This is Cort's. Did you get your deer? So we started to identify, what is that? What is that crazy motivation that gets people up at 3 o'clock in the morning, trudging through, dragging? And we found out that there were 5 elements, and we called them the keys to the motivation of recreation. There's 5 reasons why people pay. Number 1, which I didn't understand when we wrote the book.
So this is bonus material.
Yeah. The number 1 reason people will pay for the privilege of working harder than they'll work when they're paid is that the feedback is more frequent in recreation than it is in work. And I was just listening to a talking head this morning who said cricket, the great English game, is falling out of favor because a cricket tournament takes 4 days to play. And he said, nobody is going to wait 4 days to figure out what the outcome is. So if you think about recreation, every time you plant a ski pole and make a turn, flick a fly rod,
shoot a hoop, squeeze a trigger on a sporting clays course, or hunting live birds, your feedback is instantaneous, which allows you to adjust your behavior to win before that game runs out. So the frequency of feedback is the thing that I didn't understand was the major differentiator between work and recreation. One of the books I like is Daniel Pink's. It's called Drive. He talks about motivation, and one of his items is mastery. What you're talking about, rapid feedback, is a necessary ingredient to mastery. If you don't have that, you can't master it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's the feedback is the issue. The second element, which connects to the feedback, is that the scorekeeping in recreation is better than it is at work. So if you're watching a basketball game, you're playing golf, anything that you're engaged in. And one of the things I'd like to just insert, because sometimes the game of work gets a bad rap about being athletics and jocks and that sort of thing. But we figured out that the major application of the game of work is something that's universal, and that's shopping. Because you've never met a shopper who didn't come home and tell you how much they saved.
Still a scoreboard.
So,
has nothing to do with athletics.
Absolutely. Has nothing to do with P&L and ROI and all that other stuff. So this is a universal concept. But that feedback, that frequency of feedback, is driven by the right kind of scorecard. So you spend 4 hours on a golf course, you're going to get feedback 70, 80, 90, 120 times.
130 maybe.
130 could be.
If it's
we're
me.
We're not casting any aspersions. But you're going to get that feedback. Well, most of us go to work for 4 hours, and the feedback deal in most companies, getting better, by the way, but the feedback in most companies, I want you to work 2,000 hours-ish, and then we'll have a 40-minute sit-down, mostly about what you screwed up.
I had a conversation. One of the reasons I started Covalent was the name of that company, trying to do what you've been doing. And so this is why it's such a fascinating and so why I'm so grateful for this conversation. I was a fairly young CEO. I think I was 30 at the time and hadn't really done this before. But as you build a company, you go through these cycles of first year, the first employee, and then you hire a couple people and you're the manager. And then you hire a manager to lead your managers, and you have other teams, and sometimes you're player coach for a long time. And it was my first annual review being a CEO, spectating while my head of operations interviewed one of the mid-level managers who had a team. And I sat down and was just a spectator, saying, guys, I'm just going to watch, see how it goes. And my head of operations, after the pleasantries, said, okay, how do you feel you're doing? He said, Fernando was his name. Fernando, how do you feel you're doing in this specific item? And Fernando said, man, I think I'm doing really good. Probably 8.5, maybe 9 out of 10. And my head of operations put his head down, closed his eyes, like almost painful. He said, I'm really disappointed to hear that, because I think you're probably closer to a 4.5 or a 5 in that category. And just the air was sucked out of the room. Like everything was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And they talked through it. It was a really painful experience. And then they moved on to the next item, kind of had a little kumbaya moment, like, okay, we'll figure this out. And they went to the next item and said, okay, how do you feel you're doing on this one? I was like, fingers crossed, it's going to be good. And Fernando, really confident. Yeah, I think I'm a 9 out of 10 on that. And head of operations just said, his eyes got big, man, you're like a 4 on this. And I realized in that moment I had failed so bad as a CEO, because I hadn't given my team members the ability to know how successful they were every single day. There's no score, and there wasn't rapid feedback. So there's a ambiguous score given once a year. Sets people up for failure.
Here's my comparison.
Yeah.
When your wife or significant other prepares a wonderful meal, and at the end of the meal she said, "How was it?" and you respond, "Let me get back to you in writing on our anniversary."
She knows it was sad if I say that.
To me, that's the tell. That's the absolute tell on annual performance appraisals.
And then I have to live with whatever the food is, or she has to live with the uncertainty. For one of the questions I'm going to get to in just a little bit, but I'll just ask you now: what is the impact on what impact does uncertainty have on performance or lack thereof?
Well, uncertainty leads to fear. Fear leads to paralysis or inactivity. And so uncertainty, one of the quotes in the game of work is that great managers constantly seek to minimize, I would say eliminate, uncertainty. See, when you tell the story about your VP of Ops and that conversation, he's had 2,000 hours since the last annual performance appraisal. And in those 2,000 hours, nothing occurred that added certainty to Fernando's performance. And here's one of the other quick discoveries, is that every day, everybody wants to know if they've won or lost. And recognize that my coach, my manager at work, is at a minimum the third most important person in my life. And if things aren't going well at home, he or she can become number two in a hurry. So we have this, whether you call it positional power, respect, hierarchy, history. Managers, in most instances, refuse to accept their charter as a leader.
What does that mean, their charter? What is their charter?
Well, if you go back to the very beginning of what management is, it's getting results through people. Almost everybody will agree with that. I mean, Drucker, you can go back. There was a guy named Robinson around the turn of the century from 1900, not 1900, but from 1800 to 2000. It's about 1895, I think. And he said, our greatest challenge of managers is to figure out what is a fair day's work. We don't have to worry about the comp, because we got all of those people in HR making sure that everybody's from Lake Wobegon. We're all above average. So we circulate that pay thing, which is an atrocity, throughout an entire market. Are you market? Are you making market? Are you market? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with your work. It has to do with all the other people that have work like you.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody wants to know whether they have won or lost. When I was in college, part of the way I paid for my education is I loaded grocery trucks. And we had a number, and that number was 10,000 pounds an hour. Okay? Clear, we were Teamsters when Jimmy Hoffa was a Teamster back in the real Teamster day. But it was 10,000 pounds an hour. Now you'd get goofy trips. Some of the trips you'd be hand stacking everything. Some of the trips you'd get to run in with a pallet jack. Well, you can get a lot more pounds in a pallet jack, unless you have the onus of all truck loaders, potato chips. Nothing but air, no weight contribution at all. But we knew that was expected. And so when they talked about whether or not we were going to overtime, we worked from 6 to 2 a.m. By midnight, that shift coordinator, his name was Beaver, beautiful guy, 5'5" tall and 5'5" wide. It was just a bowling ball. But it was Beaver, And this was in Wisconsin in Green Bay. And if we were running a little bit behind, Beaver would send somebody out at midnight to buy a keg of beer. And we put it in the vestibule of the freezer. Now you got a bunch of college kids, because we came in for the summer, and a bunch of old guys that are there. Beer on a hot night, you bet. We always finished on time. But we knew, the point is we knew what it was.
You knew what finishing was.
We knew what finishing was. And people want to know whether they've won or lost. Now, here's the real downside, and it's kind of a domino thought, so stay with me. If I don't know how to win, relationship, impending divorce, work, my pickleball partner, if I'm in a deal and I don't know what winning looks like or nobody's defined it for me, my immediate de facto thought is there must be no way to win.
A lot of people feel that way in life.
Yeah. Now, if there's no way to win, and I like this as an analogy, you get paired in that golf tournament. It's usually an association tournament. You got three guys you don't know. And you stand up on the first tee, and one guy hits it out of bounds. The second guy hits it in the water. And the third guy says, should I hit it again or put it back on the tee? Immediately you figure out there is no way to win. And so the only thing you can do is yell for the beer cart, even if you're not a beer drinker. Yeah. And so what happens in a business is if you let people for any particular period of time, minutes, seconds maybe, languish and there must be no way to win, they will quit emotionally. Now, at that point in time, you have the proverbial fork in the road. If they quit and leave, you've solved part of the problem. The other thing you get is a brand new chance to start over again with a new employee. But if they quit and stay, then you don't get a vacancy, you get a virus. And it starts to attack surrounding healthy tissue. You believe they just fired Cort? I can imagine. I thought he was a 9. Somebody said he was a 4. What does that mean? And so when you let somebody go who's obviously, and I wrote about this in the last book, Better People Leader, if you let somebody go, you need to survey the surrounding people. Because everybody that thought, and I'm sorry to pick on you, but everybody that thought Cort was a 9 and we knew it was a 4, and if they persist in that, you got a deeper virus than you thought.
Yeah. I need to, we have a couple of our employees that listen to this, of the Aspen employees. So Fernando is phenomenal, by the way.
Yes.
We've improved our feedback loop. One of the quotes that you loved, you quoted Thomas Monson. You said, when performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported, the rate of performance increases. And then you said this about it, which I love and did without knowing that I actually do it. And I thought I was just obsessive and micromanaging and fanatical. But you wrote this in your book, increasing the frequency of feedback improves the quality and quantity of performance. If you're having a difficult time managing your labor resource and you're measuring it monthly, then go to weekly measurement. It will improve. If you go to a daily measurement, it will improve again. And if you go to an hourly measurement, it will improve even more. And I loved that. And we had a software development project that kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. And I said, I need an update every 2 hours on this until it's completed. Well, we have another 2 weeks. Awesome. For the next 2 weeks, I want an update every 2 hours of what's progressed. Yeah. And it was really effective in driving the performance. We hit it. We got it pushed out. Tell me what's next. So we have feedback is more frequent, scorekeeping. These are the 5 reasons of motivation.
The third one is that the goals are more clearly defined in recreation than they are in work. So if you and I go spend a good chunk of change to go play Pebble Beach golf course, the they're going to do a couple of things to us that we should have done at work. Number one, they're going to give us a map and a scorecard, right? So, I mean, we don't work. We don't even put the first ball on the first tee until we have a scorecard. And they start, now at Pebble Beach, they also make you take a caddy. So you've got, again, he is going to look at every shot. He's going to suggest a club. You're going to talk about the results, and you're going to adjust your behavior based on what ball lands. Okay? Never at work. Okay? We make a big deal out of Agile as a programming tool, right?
Sure.
And sprints inside Agile. Frequent feedback, clearly defined goals.
So this is such an aside.
Yeah.
I've had the most difficult time figuring out how to quantify performance for software developers, and not just software developers, but anyone in a creative space. And it feels almost counterproductive to put measurement stipulations around a creative. Like, can you imagine sitting down with Taylor Swift and say, okay, Taylor Swift, you have 24 hours to get another banger. Like, this has to be a headline song and you only have 24 hours to do it. Can you talk about how you drive performance and measure performance for creative roles?
Well, we'd have to ask Travis Kelch this, but I don't know that Taylor doesn't have deadlines on songs because those albums are going to release. And an album release is really in core functionality no different than a software functionality delivered. So here's the interesting thing. Talk a lot about project management. We're going to do project management. Hot diggity spit. And so when you built and when you budgeted for that software to be done, you put in a whole lot of inputs. Got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. Then some project manager may or may not, but a software piece would do this. You create the critical timeline, right? Yep. Done all of that. And then for some reason, we throw all of that to the wind under the guise of creativity. It's so stupid.
Okay, well, crack the nut for me.
No, well,
I'm thinking of the same scenario. I just got done reading Bob Iger's autobiography, the CEO of Disney.
Yeah.
And he talked about this release for The Force Awakens after they bought Lucasfilms, and he had J.J. Abrams as the director. And they just had spent $4.1 billion, and it had to be a hit. They couldn't miss.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to release in May, and they ended up releasing it in December because they wanted to put quality over the deadline. And I feel like my only idea on how to do that is hire amazing people and then say, okay, what do we need to do to support you, instead of we have to hit this deadline?
Well, it's a journey. I mean, the software development is a journey. And if you want to go from here to Los Angeles and you want to be there at a specific time, then you got to be in Provo, Santaquin, Nephi, Scipio.
Hopefully not too long in Scipio.
Yeah, but my point is, you can't be in Los Angeles when you said you'd be in Los Angeles unless you have those milestones.
Yeah.
Now, if you say, we're going to be in Los Angeles sometime in April. Well, okay. Well, now we have no urgency, okay? Because in our head and in our justification and all the things we know that we can go to the airport, grab a charter, and be in LA in 73 minutes. So if we're going to be in LA in April, we don't really need to get upset until about the 28th or 29th.
Okay, so I feel like that analogy is fair for lots of things that are done in business, even the creative ones where we know where we are, we know where we're going, and the path has been, lots of people have taken that flight, lots of people have taken I-15 to get there. But if you're Lewis and Clark, or you're Columbus, and the goal is go and explore and conquer and come back and tell us, how do you attach success criteria to those emergent strategies when it's not a deliberate strategy?
Well, first off, I think it has to be a deliberate strategy.
So the game of work works for deliberate strategies, not emergent strategies.
Oh, no. No, it works for everything because you have people involved. Okay? Now, you can either take that software team and you can go put them someplace, desks just like we have outside the studio, and then you can either literally throw out all of your project management, all of the milestones you built, all of the construction that went into the initial assessment to get budget. Okay? You're to throw that out. Or you can say, guys and gals, this is why we're here. We told somebody that we could build this in 20,000 man hours, and there's 6 of us. And so, so get a calendar, get a calculator. But I'm telling you, if we're doing the right job, we have to be someplace by Friday. Now, to your point about hiring the right people, that's critical. But the overlying leadership of that says, are you okay being someplace by Friday? Other than sitting on your fanny out there at the desk or working from home? Okay? Because if you're not all right being someplace by Friday, I got to have somebody else in this role. Okay? So at some point in time, if you and I, as 2 entrepreneur, founder, whiz kids, whatever, sat down and built the timeline for that project, and we don't sell it to the people who have to deliver on it, we don't stand a chance of a dying duck in a hailstorm at getting that right. Okay? Because the reality is that the iPhone that we're using today, the iPhone just didn't fall out of the sky someplace. Right? Because Jobs was not that kind of guy. Jobs said, and so did Wozniak, everything you learn about Apple, we got to be someplace by Friday. Now, if we're not going to be someplace by Friday, forget about the road trip. If we're not going to be someplace by Friday in the building of this software, then we either need to abandon the plan and admit now and quit, or we need to get people who want to be someplace by Friday, okay? Or we throw out all this work we did to build the milestones in the project, and we just sit back and wait, and we practice the American strategy. And that is, if your May excuses support your April performance, you get a job for June.
I'm guessing you've had a lot of uncomfortable conversations with a lot of people in your career where they felt maybe a little uncomfortable, but the end result was needed and they were probably grateful in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely was. We did a learning. When we delivered the concept, we would do it in 6 half-day sessions, spread out over 5 months, spread out over 6 months. But after our first session, we would ask a participant to go home with a piece of grid paper and a ruler and a 4-function calculator as much as they needed. When you think about this, the company we started was in 1973 with grid sheets, rulers, and 4-function calculators. When somebody showed me Lotus 1, 2, 3 in 1985, I knew we could now close the patent office because we had just discovered everything we needed to go forward. I mean, it was, and then you click this and it prints a graph. Wow. Whoa. Anyway, we would ask people to go home and say, I want you to track 2 things. Just keep track of them. I don't want you to set any goals. Just see what happens. I want you to track how much time you spend watching television and how much time you spend with each of your children. So let's learn together. Well, people would come back and they'd go, a lot of head hangs, How you doing? TV's pretty good. How about the kids? Who? But the point is that there's something that's I believe in us from our Creator, where we want to know how well we're doing. I mean, we're here to progress. We're here to change. We're here to get better. I mean, that's a bargain made long ago, far away, with everybody that's on the earth. So that's built in.
And we want to know what behaviors are going to drive the outcomes that we're most interested in. We touched on this just a second ago, and I have to ask you. You have a couple quotes in here that I took a picture of one of them and thought, maybe that's going to be a little harsh in today's economy and ecosystem, but it's how I feel, and it served me to think this way, so I'm going to share it with other people, even though it's not popular. And there's a couple of them, and then I want to get your take on it. So this quote: everyone is born with equal chance to become just as unequal as he or she possibly can. And then another quote: think about all the people who are trying to change the rules today. They are trying so hard to make things fair and equal that they never get into the real game where they can win. Another quote: winners don't try to change the rules in the middle of the game. They seek only to understand them well enough to win. Another quote: winners keep track of results. Losers keep track of reasons. This is a quote from Phil Knight, which I feel fits right in. Phil Knight, CEO of Nike, he wrote this letter recently to all the Nike employees. Said, "It feels like winning is getting a losing reputation this day. It's time to change that." I'm just curious. All of those are fairly like general patent, like America loves a winner and we won't tolerate a loser. What do you say to people that say that's just too harsh? It's not kind. Can you talk to that?
I don't remember where this came from, but it was recently somebody was asked about and was given credit for creating something. And their response was, yeah, I didn't create it. I just discovered it. I mean, well, that's the way I feel about the game of work. There's nothing in here that is necessarily written out of my opinion as much as it is written out of my observations.
And so you can say something and someone could say, well, I'm upset, or that feels unfair. And you could say the same thing. You can try and change the rules, or you can figure out how to learn the rules to leverage them to your advantage. Sure. And the advantage of your organization and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk a lot about participation trophies, that everybody gets a ribbon, everybody gets a cup. That only goes on so long. Okay? I mean, as you are, how old are you now, Cort?
33.
Okay, 33, practically. The epiphany and the apogee of all wisdom and knowledge.
I thought that happened when I was 16.
Yeah.
I felt that way.
the point is that at some point in time, reality takes place. Okay? And I don't want to get political because of the temptation to do so in this point in time in our lives is crazy. But we have 2.1 million federal employees. I read a quote this morning that was quoting Jack Welch. And part of Welch's shtick was that every year General Electric required you to fire 10% of the workforce that was least productive. I mean, that was just part of his cachet. Whether you want to call it the Pareto principle of 80-20 or whatever, but Jack essentially said there's stuff here not getting done by people we don't need. So since we know where we want to be by Friday, if we got people that aren't getting us there, they're gone. So think about that. 2.1 million federal employees. Welch would fire 200,000 of those people as a matter of keeping his company vibrant and exciting and moving forward. We want to terminate 1,600 people at USAID. Not 200,000. I remember one of my great epiphanies was waking up and reading the Wall Street Journal when Gertsen had taken it over. He came from Kraft. And he'd been there 90 days, and they announced in the Wall Street Journal that IBM decided this morning that they have 70,000 too many people. 70,000. I mean, how long? You talk about you're a VP guy having 2,000 hours to help Fernando. I mean, how long do you have to figure out you got 70,000 too many people? I mean, it was just amazing. And they worked on a plan, and they got, and IBM has pivoted as much as any organization probably in America over the 100 and some odd years of their existence. 70,000 too many people. And it was just an article. Nobody made a big stink about it. Probably didn't make the national news other than a business commentary. But you get, at some point in time, you and I each owe $300,000 of the federal deficit. And we're probably a few of the people that could write the check. That's every man, woman, and child in America, $300,000. Because we've been blindly going forward, spending what we think somebody should do, and printing money to make up the difference. You can't do that. You can't do it in your business. You can't do it at home. But we've somehow, and we're back to helicopter parents and participation trophies. And unless in the next, and part of the problem is a problem so big, I know how to solve it, by the way, but I'm not sharing it with anybody. But the problem's so big that even in the most aggressive administration, trying to figure out how to pay back $30 trillion in 4 years, nobody has a political will to tackle that. Okay, so we got a problem, literally, that is too big to solve in terms of anybody's opportunity role to go get it. We're far afield, but my point is there are ultimate rules of how you do business and how you go, right? And when you go to the bank, now most of us don't because we're online, but when you go to the bank, that deposit slip's very telling. There's a role for checks, has a role for cash, has a role for coin. Excuses, not on the sheet. Good intentions, also missing. Character reference? Oh, very nice, but no line for that. Okay. It's a money, it's just so clear. And I don't know. It's just you when you look at those statements, say, well, those are pretty brutal. Well, they're not brutal if you accept them.
There's a quote from Sylvester Stallone in one of the Rocky movies, and he says, "Let me tell you something you already know. Life ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and it'll beat you to your knees and keep you there if you let it." And that's where he says it's not about how hard you can hit, but it's about how hard you can get hit and keep going.
Yeah.
It's not a comfortable topic for people to address, and I'm grateful that you addressed it. I once suggested that it should be required college reading to have everyone read Atlas Shrugged, and I was not met with much agreement with the group I was talking with. I think it'd be so valuable, though. Value must be created for value to be taken. 5 reasons of motivation. We're 3 of the 5 through.
Okay.
Feedback needs to be more frequent. Scorekeeping and goals are clearly defined. What are the last 2?
Last one is the coaching's more consistent.
Interesting.
And so you coach towards the results. Now, nobody's going to go up to forgot the man's name. He's the Canadian hockey player that scored the goal in overtime.
Okay.
Connor McDavid. I think that's right. Nobody's going to go tell him how to do that. Okay. Connor's got the game. Okay. It's like going back and telling Donovan Mitchell, the great guard we had for the Utah Jazz, Donovan, I think you need to change your shot. No.
He needed to change his 3-point shot, though, Chuck. He didn't have a great 3.
Right. And you know that. Why?
Oh, because I'm the expert.
Because his numbers didn't reflect our expectation.
Fair. Yeah.
And that's the difference between pros and amateurs. All of this is, over, this book came out in 1984.
This one did?
Yeah.
I was reading this and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so resonant and it's so applicable. Holy cow. I thought it was in 2006 is when I saw the copyright for maybe a reprint.
The last run.
But it was 1984.
1984. And the reason that Forbes, really it's a Forbes contributor, was given this assignment, he said, his editor said, I need you to go do a piece on gamification. This was 10 years ago because it was pretty popular. And gamification came out in 2004 from Berkeley. So you have a Berkeley, Silicon Valley connection, and that's where gamification came from. So this editor, the contributor interviewed me, and we came up with the 5 principles and shared it and did the thing. And in that, because this book predated Silicon Valley by 2 decades, that's why I got the moniker grandfather gamification.
So we're missing one. We have feedback, frequent feedback, scorekeeping, clearly defined goals, and coaching is more consistent. Which one are we missing?
It ties back into knowing where we want to be by Friday.
Clarity of outcome.
Yeah, we're just there. And, there are some coaches, we have coaches, and these names may not resonate with everybody, but Bobby Knight coached the Indiana University and held the record until recently of most college victories in the Big Ten. Tommy Knight
Bobby Knight?
Bobby Knight was a taskmaster. Lombardi, I'm a big Packer fan. Lombardi, they asked one of his offensive tackles, they said, he is so intense. He said, do you think he has ulcers? And Dave Hanna, this big tackle that played for Lombardi, he said, nope, but he's a carrier. So you look at that. You look at Wooden, and we hear the stories about getting your socks right so you don't get blisters in your shoes. And you hear all of that. There's nothing woke about those guys, other than you woke up quick if you were going to play for them. So even Duffy Doherty, our coach at Michigan State while I was there, they were, let's get this done. They knew where they wanted to be by Friday. But they were consistent. And so Isaiah Thomas, who played for Bobby Knight at Indiana, was asked as his son was in high school. They said, I don't know why the story touches me, but they asked Isaiah, because his kid was pretty good, they asked Isaiah, they said, which colleges are you looking at? And Isaiah said, I can't think of anybody that I would entrust my son with, like Coach Knight at Indiana. Right? Tough, disciplined, on top of the game. George Patton. Those are the people who built this country.
Can I, this is a segue into, I think CEOs and founders, executives, managers, having some self-reflection and having some hard conversations with themselves. You use this phrase in your book. You wrote, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, said that if a lie is repeated long enough and loud enough, everyone will believe it. And you talked about that in reference to people saying, hey, how is your business? Oh, cash flow's all right, or pretty good, and the lies that they were telling themselves. And I'm curious, I think a big part of a consultant is this aspect. I don't want to call it necessarily therapy, but there is this aspect where you say, you help someone see something that they don't see themselves. How do you navigate helping someone confront a mistruth or a lie in their business?
That's tough, and it's got probably two answers. But the one that's consistent with our methodology is let's go measure it. Just, I don't care what it is. And I'm probably maniacal, and I'm probably old school, and I'm probably with Knight and Lombardi and all those other guys. But let's just go track the results. Okay? It's Donovan Mitchell with a three-point shot, and you're going, Donovan, it's 23%. Now, let's just get clear that, Donovan, the 23% is not my opinion. Okay? We didn't vote on this. This is not something we key in as we leave the Delta Center after a game. It's 23% because out of 100 shots that you take outside the rim, it goes in 23% of the time. Norm for the NBA is 31. Steph Curry is 48. Now, let's not this be about my opinion. Donovan, sweetheart, baby cakes. Y'all think we got a problem here? You have a turnover issue? Oh, okay. How long did they stay? 93 days. How oriented are they after 93 days? They can barely find the bathroom. Do you think 93 days is an issue in terms of the average length of stay of your employees?
You have to measure it.
Yeah. It's, and again, bankers are a necessary evil. They do a great job in the things that we ask them to do. They're not the most creative people. Now, you have a company that might cast better facts on that than I do, but I'm guessing that that your banking clients don't often turn their back on your appraisal and lend more money than they ask for. They pretty much get that 23% program.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at your business through your banker's eyes, wow. I'm a member of the Park City Angels. We invest in startup companies. And I thought when I went in that people would go, oh, a grandfather of gamification, been doing this for 50 years. Boy, I'd be lucky to have his expertise. Don't even need his money. Well, I forgot something about entrepreneurs, and that is that we all have a blind spot towards reality. And if we didn't, we wouldn't have started the thing in the first place. So they didn't care anything. They just want my money. And too many founders, their goal in life is the next round. Okay, so I wound up getting kind of a nasty reputation because I'm the guy I'm like the little boy in the Emperor's Clothes story. I put my hand up. You guys made a great presentation. We got the typical hockey stick that takes us to nirvana in 5 years. And my question is always, how are we going to keep from going broke while we're fixing to get rich?
They don't like that question much.
Huh?
They don't like that question much.
It's not a favorite founder's response opportunity. But if you've conceived that right, if you've got the market, if you've got the product, if you've got the benefit cost ratio that makes sense to your consumer, not to the next round, to the person that's ultimately going to pay, take ownership, and consume, then your deal's running pretty well.
Chuck, I have a question for you about when we interview founders, and entrepreneurs, we generally talk about their entrepreneurial experience, and then we say, what's a principle you're passionate about or something you feel expert in? And I asked you this question. You said, I'm really passionate about the idea of appreciation. And that was the last, I probably would have picked 7,000 topics before I thought you would say appreciation. Could you, why appreciation?
Well, so one of the things, the secret sauce in the game of work, and it's really not in the book, but the secret sauce of these 5 principles when they come together is that we create a culture of appropriate feedback. And a culture of appropriate feedback means, number one, you don't go 2,000 hours before somebody says thank you. That we bring into that culture what is winning, and therefore what is celebrating. So a dear friend of mine just retired. And in your bathroom, you have their product. It's Gojo hand soap. Okay? And Gojo is a company that got started in the Depression, and it owns Purell, the hand sanitizer, which we all understood from COVID. They're wonderful people. Solid, Ohio-based, privately held. Their vice president of manufacturing just retired. His name's Greg. I won't embarrass him with it. But we got to the point where they started to celebrate if they had a record run on a line in a shift, day part. If they had a record run, it was at this level, then Greg would cook hamburgers. So now it snows in Ohio. I don't know if you know that, but so he retired and he was back for his last hurrah. And one of the things that they had been holding up on some of these celebrations, et cetera, because Greg was coming. So Greg went back, and I have a picture of him and his spatula on the custom-made grill that they created under the shelter to keep the snow off of them. And it's 4 degrees outside. And Greg is cooking hamburgers because they set a record and they knew what Friday was supposed to look like. Okay. Those people just go crazy. They know what the intent is. They know what the production plan would be for a shift or a day or a week or a month. And everybody knows it. Now, because of spikes in demand, they have a somewhat disproportionate amount of part-time employees. Well, guess what every part-time employee knows the day before the tee goes in the ground on the first tee in Pebble Beach? They know what the number is. And it inculcates, because what happens is that when you touch that part of our creator's input, when you touch that part that says, I want to know, and not all people are winners. I mean, you don't have to go very far to figure out that, again, when I say everybody has the equal right to become just as unequal as they possibly can, there are a lot of people that pass, that whisk, that walk away, that are not going to be engaged. But when you tap into that person who says, I'm going to give you 8 hours, and I want to know if this is a win. That's something. When I was loading trucks, I knew what my numbers were. I didn't have a family. I didn't take it home and share it with my kids, but we all knew. And there's just, nobody's going to wait 4 days in a cricket match for the outcome. That was so impactful.
I was going to ask you a question before we got into this about when you mentioned the banker. I was going to say, people are going to hear this and say, but we're not numbers, we're people. And you just answered it. I don't need to ask that question. You just answered it. So I appreciate you saying that. I'm curious what's next for you. So you've written this book.
Well,
you're skiing still.
I'm skiing still if I keep standing up. But yes, I'm skiing, playing with 10 grandchildren, and traveling. I know I need to write the book on appreciation. And so I guess now I've said that in front of who knows how many people.
Hundreds of people in Utah that are going to know you.
Hopefully somebody doesn't steal the idea. But no, but we can wrap with this. The whole thing about appreciation is when you look at our state, and we have huge volunteerism in this state. Our Fraser Bullock was just talking the other day in 2002. We went out for 25,000 volunteers. We got 40. And the bilinguality of so many Utahns is so great. But we have that amazing volunteerism. Nobody's getting paid directly. I mean, we know there are blessings in service, but those are things that people get out and do. And I think that if, just like being in a situation where I don't know whether I'm winning or losing, if I'm not being appropriately appreciated in any relationship, it's going to just spiral into the ground. And it costs nothing. Absolutely costs nothing. So never forget this guy's name. He's a father of behavioralism. His name starts with a B and it'll come to me. But he said the first rule of behavioralism is you got to reinforce the behavior you want repeated. So when the world is counting accidents, game of work companies count days between when the world's counting missed shipments, game of work practitioners are counting perfect loads. So, again, I didn't create it. I just discovered it, Cort.
I want to read one quote and then I have one more question for you. I want you to have the last word.
Okay.
As you're talking about winners and how the world is has winners and losers in it, it brought this quote to mind, and I think so many people shy away from greatness and feel uncomfortable letting their accomplishments be what they are. And this quote by Marianne Williamson is one of my favorites. She said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." And the reason I like that is it says play big, go to your full extent. That there's so much beauty in being the full potential of what you can be. And so thanks for writing the book. Last question. If you could sit across from a former version of yourself and give yourself one piece of advice, what version of yourself would you sit across from and what would you tell him?
I would probably sit across from myself as a early entrepreneur. And for a long time, our company was constrained. There you go, Michael. We were constrained by my unwillingness to accept that other people could teach this as well as I could. So if I could, that would be the person I would sit for. And what I would tell that individual is forget about yourself and go get some people, because it ain't that tough.
Love it.
And as, I don't know if I should, yeah, I think we shared this when we were off camera, but in our best year, profit, sales, engagement, in our best year, I only touched 5% of our revenue. I mean, I managed it, but I only delivered 5% of what our entire organization delivered. And took 3 trips and bought a house I thought I never could afford because I hired other people. So there's the great lesson of Coonradt's life.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining. It's such a treat for me.
Mine entirely. Thanks, Cort.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, brother.
All right, so you can turn that into something.
Yeah, we'll have it out in a couple weeks, and we'll send you all the clips. It'll be on Spotify and